Hi everyone, this is Mrs. Brown here tonight. The purpose of this presentation is to tell you a little bit about what happens when we leave Oedipus, and the last time we saw him he was completely blinded and was being banished and completely kicked out of his home of Thebes, and where this new play opens, which is Antigone. There's actually an entire play, the middle play of this trilogy, or the tetralogy is the official term for this group of 3 plays in the Greek theater, that explains what happens, and it's known as Oedipus et Colonos. And essentially, Oedipus is blinded, he's grieving, remember his wife and now he's learned his mother is dead, roams around the lands of Greece. His 2 younger daughters do go with him to take care of his father, but basically nobody wants him. They look at him as this, the killer of his father and the marrier of his mother, and, the one that brought down his whole city of Thebes because of his own pride and hubris. So he can't even find a home. No, none of the towns or villages or the rulers will take him in. Finally, he does find a place to settle in and to stay. He's accepted by King Theseus, who was a mighty ruler and hero in his own right, and there's a whole separate side story of mythology that goes along with King Theseus. But he decided to show grace and mercy to Oedipus, and this was a blessing on King Theseus to do this for this poor man. And Oedipus lives out the remainder of his life. He pays the punishment, he repents of his sin, so he's able to die in a state of grace. And his grave actually becomes a sacred place and is said to offer protection to travelers who go there and visit at the grave of Oedipus. So several years have gone by, and now the girls are teenagers, and their father is dead, and they've been, living as guests in this town of Theseus, or in Theseus's kingdom, and they decide it's time to go back home. So they go back home, and their uncle Creon takes him in, and Antigone actually gets engaged to Creon's son Haman. But Oedipus's exile has created some problems. With Oedipus gone, the line of succession has kind of been disrupted. And the 2 sons, kind of argue with each other, and then they kind of make this deal. They say, okay, we're brothers. What we'll do is we'll share. So you take the kingdom first, and then we'll rule for 2 years, and then I'll come over and rule for 2 years, and we'll split all the burdens and all of the problems of being rulers. But for those of you who have little brothers and sisters, this might not be quite a surprise. It doesn't exactly go so well, because Eteocles, who's the oldest brother, says, okay, I'm the oldest brother, I'll go first, and now I'm king, and here I am up on my throne. And he gets to the end of 2 years, and he says, you know what? I like being king. I don't want to change thrones here. So guess what, Polynices, my little brother, I'm not giving up the throne. Too bad for you. You can just go away. And he actually banishes and kicks his younger brother completely out of the kingdom and says, nope, this is mine. I'm claiming it. I'm keeping the throne, and says goodbye to his younger brother. Now, Polynices is outraged by this. Now, this goes just beyond the little, sharing toys back and forth and saying, it's not fair and I didn't get my turn. His brother Eteocles had made an oath in front of everyone about this kingdom and the way things would work, but Eteocles betrayed him and went back on his oath, broke this sacred promise. So Polynices feels inclined to, feels entitled. He actually raises his own army, and he says, okay, if I'm kicked out of my hometown, I'm going to go gather up all of these mercenary soldiers, and he actually leads this army of foreigners back to attack his own brother and the city of Thebes where he grew up. And that's actually a mistake in there. It's not Eteocles, it's Polynices that raises the army to come back. Well, as you can imagine, when brothers fight, it doesn't always go too well. And when 2 different kings fight, it's even bigger problem. The 2 brothers do meet together on the battlefield, and they end up killing each other. They both have wounds so bad from each other that they both die. So both brothers are now dead on the battlefields just outside the city of Thebes. So now what's poor Thebes to do? I mean, their king Laius was killed, and his murder wasn't discovered for many years. Then they had Oedipus, and then they found out that Oedipus was responsible for all these terrible things. But now Oedipus was blinded, banished, kicked out, is now dead. The 2 sons, who should be the next in direct line of succession, have now killed each other. Where do you go for the rightful heir? Well, they go back to Creon. Now, Creon, if you remember, was Oedipus's brother-in-law slash uncle. Creon and Jocasta were brother and sister. So Creon is now brought in and said, you're the closest thing we've got, you're next in line, you're the new ruler of Thebes. Here's the thing, no matter how upset Creon is about Eteocles bringing back foreign armies against his own hometown, he's dead. I mean, right? Eteocles is dead, and no matter how bad Polynices was in breaking his rule, he's dead. So how do you punish the dead? Well, Creon declares a terrible punishment. Eteocles, even though he broke his word, was the current king of the land, so he will be brought back in through the city gates and buried with all full honors. But Polynices' body must remain where it fell on the battlefield. No one can remove the body or perform any of the funeral rites, or they'll be put to death themselves. So no burial, no funeral rites, no prayers, no mourning, no grieving, nothing. Leave him out on the field to rot. Now, you may say, okay, you might say to yourself, that's kind of yucky, but, what's the big deal? Well, the thing is, you have to understand the Greek religious beliefs about burials and about bodies. If the body wasn't even just symbolically buried with the proper prayers and rituals, the thought was that person would not be allowed to enter the underworld. So the gods had declared that when somebody dies, there's a certain way that bodies have to be treated. But Polynices, not being allowed these burial rites, is now condemned to wander forever as a shade or as a spirit. In other words, he will never be allowed to enter into the underworld. He's sort of doomed forever to just wander around as this unattached ghost throughout all of eternity. So his soul is essentially damned. He has no place to go because these rituals won't be performed. So going back to Ismene and Antigone, they now have this terrible choice. If you think about these poor girls, I mean, everything they've been through in their life, discovering that their mother and father were actually father and son, that they got kicked out of the kingdom, they've been following their dad around for this many years. They finally come back to find their brothers engaging in a civil war. Now both of their brothers are dead, but they are bound by law to obey Creon. Not just because he's the king, but also because he's their uncle. He's the head of their household. He's their family member. But they, as the sisters, are also the closest family member to their brother. And if they don't go and perform that ritual, their brother's doomed for eternity. So Antigone is the one in particular that starts to fret over this choice. Should she obey the laws of her king and the head of her family who has told her these things? Or is there a higher law that she should obey, even if the risk is that she would have to give up and be punished by death if she actually goes and tries to bury her brother? And this is exactly where our play begins. It's early dawn, the morning after the battle. There's still smoke rising from the various fires, and the bodies are still out there of the soldiers that haven't been buried. It's very cold, it's very dark, it's very bleak, and the two sisters meet and start to talk about their choices. And that is the opening of Antigone.